You know, we always pray every single time that we run a call that we all get to go back home, but there's always that potential or that one time that something's going to happen. And I'd much rather try to get as much information ahead of it and be prepared for that, because you're never given the perfect storm or the perfect opportunity where you're going to have all the right resources, all the right people in play. And so it could be early during the day when we're short-handed typically, and we've got our staff here, and we've got personnel that maybe not be as seasoned as some of our senior guys that are usually around in the evening times, or it could be late at night, you know, and we have plenty of people and resources available to be able to assist in this situation. So what I'd like for you to do is I want you guys to kind of put yourselves in the perspective as an incident commander, as a RIC team officer, as a RIC team person, rescue intervention crew, a firefighter, and an EMT, okay? On a scene, and it goes bad, okay? We have a collapse, we have a firefighter that gets lost, we have somebody get trapped, we have something happen, all right? Then take that perspective and pull out of that, because we always practice, or we talk about Maydays, and we always say, well, the situation will always be on a fire scene. Well, it not always will be, right? You could be an EMT on a medical call, and all of a sudden something bad happens on the scene. You know, patient goes off crazy, you know, active shooter situation, so on and so forth. You can add and twist it any ways, and that becomes a Mayday situation. You could be on a wreck, you know, where all of a sudden a vehicle comes through an intersection that you guys are working a wreck on, and all of a sudden you become a patient, or your crew gets run over by a car. You know, that could become a Mayday situation. You know, you could be driving your personal vehicle and you know, run off the side of the road and flip your car, and you're trapped in there and nobody knows you. That could become a Mayday situation. You know, so there's a lot of different ways that this could be handled. And then there's also that one time somebody pushes your orange button, right? And that notification goes off and it becomes a Mayday situation. So one of the things that I wanted to first bring up to light is that you can get out on the internet, you can do a lot of research, you can pull up all kinds of videos, you can pull up all kinds of data about Maydays, you know, how they went, how they were operated, you know, so on and so forth. But I came across this one particular one that I thought was pretty interesting, because basically what it is, it asks you, are you ready for the Mayday? And that's from those different positions. It's not just the downed firefighter, but this particular study itself was the firefighter itself being trapped. So basically, Fire Rescue Magazine back in July 2006 did a study. They took 160 firefighters as participants, right? They simulated a shopping center fire, which we're going to have. You know, we're going to have a Costco here soon. And they put each one of those firefighters acted as the lost firefighter as a Mayday, right? This is what the participants were told. You and your crew are stretching an 1 3/4 line into a structure when you encounter cold smoke, zero visibility. While maintaining voice contact with your crew, you begin searching for the fire. Suddenly, you no longer have voice contact with your crew and you become lost and disoriented. This is not a training scenario. Your life depends on your actions. All right, so think about it. You're stuck in the middle of Costco. Can't see your hand in front of your face. You can't find the fire. You lost your team. You've lost the hose. And your lifeline is to get back out. What are some of the things that you would do to try to rescue yourself or self-extricate, right? So their studies came back and said 52% of them attempted radio contact, Mayday, 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 you know? 38% of them activated their pass device. 82% searched for exit. 8% used noise to make a noise with a tool. 3% used their signal on their flashlight trying to signal anybody if they could see them. 9% followed the hose line. 4% did their pass device. 1% started doing initiating breathing techniques. 1% lost one of their PPEs, their gloves or hoods, for whatever reason. Less than 1% lost their radio. Less than 1% covered a pass to listen. Less than 3% passed over the hose line. 15% removed their gloves. And then less than 4% actually made it out alive. Now you can go through here and you can say all the reasons why they may have done this, they may have done that, you know. it comes down to it a lot of times that most people will not call Mayday until it's too late, right? They've got, you know, that whole ego thing. They don't want to call off the Mayday because it makes them look weak. They could think that they can get out, so on and so forth, and then panic starts setting in. And all these things start to break down. You know, they lost PPE, they took off their masks, they took off their gloves, so on and so forth. So, but that 4%, think about that, out of 160 firefighters. That's pretty bad. Okay? So tonight, what I want to do is I want to talk about the objectives of being ready for the Mayday and how we manage that. We're going to identify the 3 key requirements to make Monrovia ready for that. We're going to describe the communications between the IC, operations, and county fire. We're going to talk about the utilization of Lunar. We're going to identify an active Mayday, inactive Mayday, verbal and nonverbal notifications and what these actually mean. We're going to describe the person accountability report. Everybody knows about PAR, or most of you should. And then we'll talk about the tactical readiness of this, okay? One of the things I want to make sure that you key on is this piece right here. The first experience of a Mayday should not be when the actual emergency happens. We've got to train, okay? We've got to continue to train. We've got to make this something that we do on every type of training that we have. You know, we always will set up a class specifically just on Maydays, and that's what we practice, right? And then we probably won't touch on it for another 6, 8 months, maybe not even a year, okay? This should actually be something that we train on every single time we do some sort of training. Throw the type of situation of the training sideways. What if it went bad? All right? And start thinking about how we're going to handle that from an IC's perspective, how we're going to handle that from a tactical team rescue perspective, how we're going to teach about self-rescue, you know, and then all the other resources that are going to become involved when that Mayday goes off. So being ready. You know, the 3 main things, it requires a team ready to act. And who is this? Who is it? Everyone. It's not just RIT, right? It can't be always RIT because we're never going to have a perfect scene where we're going to actually be able to establish a RIT company or RIT rescue intervention crew, okay? How many times have you been on a working structure fire and you've actually seen in Monrovia a group of personnel standing by as RIT? I can think of maybe 3 times that we've actually had sufficient personnel, trained sufficient personnel on the scene standing by. Every other time, we're using every single person that we have on the scene to actually do the work, right? So what does that mean? Who is the person? Who's the team? Everybody. All right, so that's where this training comes into perspective. I know that right now we've got our aerial trained crews right now that are going through special rescue intervention training. We're doing specific types of training, so on and so forth. We're doing that. But really what we're doing is we're gearing this team to help manage the overall outcome of a call, right? And then we're going to start sharing that information, start spreading that out to everybody else. It requires the right equipment, right? What does that mean? What do you think requires the right equipment? We think of your radio, your PPE, the right kind of a training, the right kind of equipment, the right kind of resources, you know, the communication, you know, how to manage the operation, so on and so forth. Okay, so those are all the kinds of things that we talk about as equipment-wise. And then again, what I keep harping on is the continuous piece of the training, right? And of course, I know how many of y'all know Paul Combs, and he does all these drawings and stuff. I saw this, thought it was pretty funny. You know. And Mayday involves all personnel assigned to the incident. All personnel. And all must know their roles as well as the roles of the others on the fire ground. And that goes for the incident commander, the firefighters, the company officers, the chief officers, the dispatchers, EMS personnel, because every single person on this incident, regardless of what role you're playing on that incident, is the key role to make sure that we all get to go home, right? If this thing goes sideways, we're going to have to depend on everybody to step in and do their job, okay? Whether it's self-rescue to the firefighter themselves, to the established rescue team that tries to go after the person that's down, to the incident commander who's going to try to manage that Mayday situation, to the operations incident commander who's going to take over the operations from the suppression side while the incident commander and the Mayday team try to do the rescue. The dispatchers, making sure that the right resources are coming during this situation, extra ambulances, air transport, additional resources from other departments. If it's a major collapse, heavy rescue, Madison, Huntsville, all these things start coming into play on how this handles, and then your EMS personnel to be able to take care of the firefighters that were injured or killed or so on and so forth. One of the things that in here, the crisis team, they're going to have to deal with, the situation afterwards, of having that catastrophic event to play through. The notification of the family members that are going to have to be notified, the chief officers who are not on the scene, all those things, the PIO who's going to be managing, the news crew and the situation, the story, what happened, the documentation piece of it, because after that there's going to be an after action report that's going to have to be done. Figure out what happened. Why did it happen? Was it because of training? Was it because of a catastrophic event that you couldn't control? Those are all those things that start coming into play. So we need to make sure that everybody is in tune on this, how this rolls, okay? So preparation for managing the Mayday. We got to conduct training and proper communications during the Mayday. Tonight, after this, we're going to kind of walk through a tabletop exercise of what that would look like, okay? We're going to do this conducting of the tabletop live scenario-based exercises with key personnel to understand the process for managing the Mayday. We're going to kind of break that down and get the understanding of what the role would be if you were in that position. We're going to start doing training with the firefighters on how and when to call a Mayday. So you're going to start seeing a little bit more up-tempo of involving a Mayday situation and a lot going further or into the future of what that training looks like, and then including that Mayday situation. We're going to start talking about the training of the firefighters personnel and methods of self-rescue, on how important that is, because we're not going to always have that dedicated RIT team standing by to be able to go into action to be able to rescue people. So you're going to need to know how to self-rescue. Conduct rescue intervention crews, training evolutions. We're kind of doing that now with our aerial class that we're doing. And then, we're going to critique the after actions of the fire-related incidents as near misses. We kind of do that now with a lot of the calls that we have, especially on the working structure fires, of lessons learned. We're going to start really kind of keying in. Was there anything that we potentially could have happened? Was there any near misses that we didn't actually include or conduct during that time? So we want to make sure that we're covering all that, okay? Why is it important to train for a Mayday? Some of you may recognize this picture, some of you may not. This was actually an incident that happened in Harvest that I was talking about, where we almost lost 4 personnel. One of the things that was driven from this was that when the IC called the Mayday, it actually caught County Fire off guard, and they had seasoned dispatchers on the call, and they had no idea on how to manage that, because it was the IC that was calling the Mayday for firefighters that were not responding. So one of the things that we made sure that we included in our Mayday procedure was the failed for par checks, right? One of the things that we talked about, you probably have heard it multiple times on calls. County Fire does that now on every call, where they'll check status, or they'll ask for a par. One of the things that we've derived out of this is that if they fail par check after 3 failed attempts, it becomes a Mayday situation. Whether the incident commander calls it, or operations calls it, or we're not able to get in touch with the personnel on the scene. And then it will start being managed as a Mayday potential until otherwise determined it's not. But one of the things that, we wanted to make sure was that these skills are identified as a perishable skill. We talk about it all the time about, hey, you get out here and you do turnout drills, right? Especially when you're going through firefighter 1, so on and so forth. You get your times down really, really quick. You start learning how to pump a truck, so on and so forth. You learn all these skill sets on how to get, and you get really good at it while you're fine-tuning it, right? And then 6 months goes from there. You maybe not touch it in a while, maybe a year or so, and the next thing you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're behind that pump panel, or you're that firefighter that's having to put your turnout gear on, and you start slowing down, or you start forgetting steps, valuable steps, so on and so forth. Well, that's what we're talking about when we say it's a perishable skill. Well, self-rescue, Mayday situations, those things are perishable as well. You know, and if you're not training on those and keeping it in the back of my mind of, okay, how am I going to handle this situation in the event something happens, right? And most of the time, the way that firefighters typically learn isn't through book knowledge. It's not through writing or reading books. It's not through taking tests, so on and so forth. It's usually from that muscle memory, right? We drill it in our hands, we drill it in our heads and stuff like that until it becomes something that at that 2 o'clock in the morning fog that we have, it just happens, right? And that's the reason why it's very, very important that we make mental images of, okay, so as we do this tabletop tonight, and now next week when we actually do the field exercise with County Fire, that we start developing those mental images. Okay, well, if this happens, this is how I'm going to operate. This is how I'm going to manage the scene. This is how I'm going to try to make sure that the outcome of this is in the positive. So we want to try to develop those during those drills and help personnel create those mental images. It can happen at any time for multiple reasons. You know, for that particular incident, it was resource limited. We had prolonged burn times. We had overlooked indicators of potential flashover. You know, I wouldn't say so much because the crew that went interior, their levels of training were pretty well It wasn't like a brand new firefighter. It wasn't like somebody who just got their firefighter one cert and we sent them in, right? And they figured it out afterwards that they weren't fully trained, right? The rapid changing environments, all these things come into play that lead up to a Mayday situation on a fire ground, right? And continuous training, continuous skills of identifying those potentials, you know, critiquing those calls after we've had them, you know, all those things build those mental images. So when and if we are on a scene again and something triggers that mental image, you'll know how to react, right? Because the main thing is we all want to go home. That is the main purpose of this whole thing. Whenever we answer that call, our main objective is that we all get to go home. Okay. So basic Mayday procedures. When a firefighter is trapped in serious trouble or presumed missing, a Mayday transmission shall be given on the assigned tactical radio frequency. And so how do we do that? What does that sound like? Anybody? Mayday, 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 right? The activation of the emergency button on the portable radio will be treated as a Mayday transmission until confirmed otherwise, right? So we've all accidentally hit that orange button or somebody pushed that button on you and it sets off the radio for the Mayday. A Mayday transmission may also be given by the firefighters themselves if 3 failed par checks by the firefighters of the team or by anyone that suspects there is a missing, trapped, or injured firefighter, right? So it doesn't have to be the person in trouble. It can be any of you guys. You could be the incident commander. You could be the operations on the Charlie side of the structure, and all of a sudden you lose contact with your team and they're not answering. You could be one of the firefighters interior, and you've got a crew that you're managing, and when your county fire asks you for a par check or the incident commander asks you for a par check, and you try to radio out or you try to get in touch with your team and they're not responding. That could be considered something to set off the Mayday. Once the Mayday is transmitted, all non-pertinent radio communication will stop and it will be acknowledged by command and county fire, okay? So there is no other information out there that is more important than the person that called name Mayday and then the incident commander and county fire trying to contact that firefighter that called the Mayday and then manage the situation from there, okay? Once that's acknowledged, the Mayday is, if possible, they should follow the Lunar report, and we'll break down the Lunar report here in just a second. Radio communications will be established on the channel of the Mayday, right? So for instance, if somebody calls Mayday, Mayday, Mayday on County Fire Main, guess where that tactical channel is now? County Fire Main, right? Somebody hits their orange button and then gets on the radio and says Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. What channel are they on now? Mayday channel, which is what? 16. It's the last channel on every single bank, okay, of your radio. If you return the knob all the way following to the right, you'll get to 16 at the very end, right? And that's your Mayday channel, all right? Radio communications will be established on that Mayday, the tactical channel if the Mayday button is radio is pushed. The IC will request additional alarms or for all resources assigned to the incident and add an additional backup for mutual aid, you know, whether it be in Huntsville, Madison, fourth due, fifth due, whatever it may be, to get additional resources coming. Why is that important? The fire's not stopping, right? Just because somebody calls a Mayday, we don't just take a break from what we're there for, which is the suppression effort. We have to manage that in both, okay? So we'll kind of break down how this starts to break apart in the multi-little facets of a job and operations, from an incident command perspective to a rescue intervention perspective to an operations perspective, and then to a liaison perspective where they're managing all the additional resources coming inbound for whatever reason we may be dealing with, okay? So, but first, let's talk about the Lunar Report. Probably one of the hardest things to remember if you don't practice this over and over and over again, right? One of the things I want you guys to know is that this doesn't have to be perfect, especially if you are the firefighter that's calling the Mayday. I promise you, in the heat of the battle, as long as we know, hey, a potential location, who we're talking to, and maybe what you need, those three things are going to be the key part of it, right? Now, your assignment, that's great. Hopefully your operations, your incident commander kind of understand and know what the situation is and what you guys were supposed to be doing. We need to know who we're talking to. It's important. And I'd much rather you tell me your name than your unit number. But if we all screamed out O'Connor, I was on the Delta side of the structure, I'm out of air, I'm trapped, we got three key parts that are very important, right? We know who it is, we know where they're at, and we know what they need. Or what the activated handheld radio will automatically switch to the Mayday talk group, which is 16, channel position 16 on the radio banks A, B, and C. So it doesn't matter if you're on A, B, or C. If you hit that orange button, it's going to automatically go to the channel 16 on that bank group, okay? County Fire will contact the at-risk responder of the Mayday on that talk group and confirm their status using the radio alias. Corey has got the job now of making sure that all our aliases are correct on our radio. So every radio has a 300 number ID, right? There is an alias that's tied to that, like your name, but it's your unit number. Your unit number is then associated to a roster that has to be submitted that has your personal information in it, your phone numbers, your name, your address, which is going to have to be updated, and you know what department you're responding for, and then your chief officer's contact information, okay? So if you are playing around and you think you're going to be slick and you hit your button, County Fire is going to know this thing, right? They're going to try to contact you. If you fail to contact or fail to answer to that, the next step is for them to reach out to a line officer. The line officer doesn't answer, they're going to send a 47 unit to your home, okay? We're eventually going to get to a point where we're going to have GPS on our radios. So last known location that showed up on the blip is where they're going to be sending that 47 unit. But for right now, they're going to be sending it to your address. All right? If a responder reports an accidental activation, they'll clear. You're supposed to clear on your radio by hitting the reset button or the orange button to reset it and verbally confirm that it was an accidental activation, and the Mayday is clear from that point, and then it's documented. If no response from that risk responder after 3 attempts to contact, I kind of went over that already, they're going to contact the IC, the chief officer. You know, we've been on incidences before where we're cleaning up, we're fixing to clear up from a call, and somebody accidentally hits their Mayday, doesn't know it, you know, and they try to raise them, they don't answer. They'll contact the IC of that incident if we're on an incident to check status of that person. And if they're 1099, they're accounted for, you need to get in contact with that person, make sure they do the reset because they may not have known that they were doing that. All right. If the ICCO is responsible for confirming the safety, notifying dispatchers, this is where I was talking about, if no contact with the chief officer, then 47 will be notified to respond to last known location or residence of the responder. So if by chance you're an EMT, right, and you're on a call, and all of a sudden the situation gets sideways and you can't get on the radio, but you're able to hit that button and you don't answer, guess what? 47's coming, right? If they can't raise you on the radio for some situation, you were on a call and they identified you as a person on that call, so on and so forth, 47 is going to be coming. All right. So this kind of starts breaking down into County Fire's policy of what this means. And there's clear definitions on that policy. You'll be able to read this as well as how this will be treated. So active Mayday, verbal notification. When a responder cannot activate their emergency button, the IC or the responder who identifies the dangers will alert County Fire by stating the unit number to County Fire, activate Mayday for blank, and provide known details of similar report. Okay, so that's in the event, for instance, the scene where the IC itself is calling the Mayday. Okay, it's a verbal notification, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. The responder reporting the Mayday should not hit their emergency button because that will move their radio away from the talk group and the responder into distress. All right, that means the IC, Mayday, 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 I've got personnel that are trapped inside of the structure, they're not responding to me. Don't hit your Mayday button because those personnel are keyed on whatever channel operations that we're operating off of, okay? Just because you called the Mayday doesn't mean that, all right? County Fire will move all non-rescue operation communications to another talk group, right? So if they assigned us to County Fire Main on a working structure fire for whatever reason, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and we get a Mayday on that call, guess what? That talk group, whether it's Ops 1, whether it's County Fire Main, then becomes the rescue channel. That becomes where the Mayday is going to be managed, all right? The incident commander from that point in perspective should be assigning an operations officer. Hopefully there's already one assigned. Typically we try to do that, having, you know, if we've got multiple sides working, we try to operate. But you've got to step out of that role of the full suppression and assign that role to somebody else, okay? So you need to find somebody that can handle the operations, the suppression team, the other resources, you know, the water supply, you know, hemp seed, 47, other additional responding units that are coming to the scene. That becomes the operations IC. The incident commander that was initially on the call then becomes the Mayday IC, who's going to be managing that rescue. And they're going to be working with a rescue intervention team, hopefully if we have one, a group that's whoever we've decided to, hey, we need you to be the rescue. If it's a self-rescue, if it's initial team, interior team that's going to try to do the rescue, those all stay on that particular talk group and work the rescue. And then from there, we start delineating and separating the suppression team and the other efforts to a secondary talk group, okay, whatever that may be. It won't always be one particular talk group and one be, you know, it's always going to be whatever it is. If it's discovered that the firefighter at risk on a different talk group, County Fire will direct the Mayday IC to the talk group with a distressed firefighter. So for instance, you've got a firefighter that gets lost and he's trying to just grab his radio and he knocks himself off the wrong channel, right? We could be on Ops 1 and all of a sudden he thinks he's on Ops 2 or whatever, and he tries to change his radio but doesn't know where he's at and then calls the Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. County Fire is going to hear that because they're going to be scanning those radios, and then they're going to take that incident commander and the designated rescue team effort and put them on that particular talk group, and then that talk group becomes the rescue channel. And then the suppression team that was on, for instance, he's on Ops 3 that called the Mayday. He takes the incident commander, or County Fire takes the incident commander, puts them on Ops 3. We were operating off of Ops 1. Ops 1 becomes the suppression side and stays there, okay? The only difference for a verbal notification is the communication talk group, original operations talk group versus a Mayday channel. So depending on the situation, if it was called Mayday, Mayday, Mayday on a specific talk group, it becomes that channel. Where if somebody hits the Mayday button and then calls the Mayday, it becomes the talk group channel 16. Okay? Firefighters under distress are going to say some really crazy things. They're not going to be clear. They're going to be screaming on the radio. They may be out of breath. They may hit their button partially and you only get a partial transmission, so on and so forth. There's all kinds of reasons why. And that's really, really why it's very important from an incident command to an operations to your interior crew team that you guys are communicating with each other on what you're doing, your progression, you know, when the par checks are called, you're giving that information, right? Because that way, as this is being recorded, County Fire may hear something that you may not, because you know, you've got a radio strapped here, but you may be helping with a suppression team. You may be humping a hose. You may be trying to get some water supply. You may be doing other things. You may be sitting right next to an engine that is, you know, high RPM and you can hardly hear yourself think, much less somebody on a radio. So as a down firefighter, if you're in trouble and you hit the button and you call Mayday, you hit the button, or you just call Mayday, we're going to mitigate to that problem. regardless of which channel it may be, okay? If you hit and you go to channel 12 and you call it because you don't know what channel talk group you're on, we're going to mitigate to that. And that's the process of the training and the reason why. The other thing I need to stress about this, and we're not going to ever have the perfect situation where we're going to have all the right resources, you're going to have all the skilled trained firefighters, you're going to have all the right suppression team, and the scene is just perfect, just ready for a Mayday. Discipline. Discipline is really going to come into play when a Mayday happens, because everybody is going to want to jump ship of what their job is or their role is to go rescue, right? And turn into that rescue mode. Suppression does not stop. Water supply does not stop. Engine operations does not stop, okay? So unless you're specifically given the role or you're right there to make the rescue, switching over to Mayday channel, switching over just to monitor, so on and so forth, where you're supposed to be handling the Charlie side exterior suppression effort, you're taking away from your role and your responsibility. For every Mayday situation, every single one, whether it's a structural collapse or whether it's just a single down firefighter, County Fire has a checklist of things to work with, not only the liaison of the operations, but the rescue IC as well, to say, hey, we know we're going to go automatically. Automatically, County Fire is going to put air transport on flying standby. We're automatically going to get at least one, not if two, more ambulances coming, even though we may have one on standby. We're going to notify a HEMC supervisor. We're automatically going to notify the chief officers that are not on the scene. We're automatically going to make sure that if it's a structural collapse, it sounds like it's a structural collapse because the Mayday called out, hey, we've just had a roof collapse, we've got 6 firefighters. They're automatically going to notify Huntsville Heavy and Madison Heavy, okay? All these things are the things that we're talking about, how we line those procedures in place, so in the event situation like that happens, they've got a playbook. All right, inactive Mayday emergency button activation, all right? CFD will immediately attempt to contact the responder responsible for the Mayday activation on Mayday talk group using their verbiage. County Fire to 1202, they'll wait for a response or U-1099. If contact is established and the responder reports an accidental identification, County Fire will then consider no active emergency, present and clear the alert, and then the firefighter has to do the same. Anything other than a report of accidental activation will trigger an emergency response from County Fire. If possible, the responder in distress should provide details of the event and the resources needed. County Fire will create a call for service and dispatch appropriately. So kind of think of this as, hey, I'm sitting on, driving down the road and all of a sudden something happens and I hit my Mayday, right? And we call that out and they create it if you're not already on an event and it's working. County Fire will attempt to raise the responder who activated the emergency button 3 times. If County Fire receives no response, they will notify the at-risk member's chief or secondary contact. So they'll go through their checkoff list of people they're going to contact. Contact will be made by phone from County Fire admin line. If no answer, then they'll direct a radio alerting. They'll set the radios off, and they may change that. They may do the alert tone first before they'll actually try to call somebody online. County Fire will provide the radio alias that activated the emergency, the name, phone number, and address shown in the department roster. If the chief officer is not available, County Fire will request law enforcement to respond to the at-risk responder's address as shown for a welfare check. And again, we're working on getting the GPS portion of that done, so it'll ping last known. Any questions on this? This one's kind of self-explanatory. Inactive Mayday verbal notification. CFD will move all active events traffic from the alert talk group. For example, if the responder calls for a Mayday on County Fire Main, all active events will be moved to an open ops talk group, okay? For whatever reason, if County Fire assigns us County Fire Main, right, and a Mayday channel goes, from that point forward, as that Mayday incident is being worked and handled, County Fire gets a call, another call for another department. They're going to dispatch the call like they normally would off of dispatch, but they will automatically assign it to a different talk group. They will not take and put it on County Fire Main. If we're on County Fire Main and Mayday comes in and Bobo's got a call and they're on County Fire Main, they are going to take every single call event other than that Mayday and pull them off of that talk group and put them on another talk group. Clear? All right, person accountability report. Is there anybody here? I know we've got a few new people, new faces that do not know what PAR check is. And if you're new, Raise your hand that you're not sure what PAR check is. Okay. All right, so it is an acronym for Person Accountability Report. All right. It's initiated as soon as the first arriving scene. So once you first get on a scene of a call, there is a timer that kicks off first unit on the scene for 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, County Fire is going to ask for PAR, especially on working structure fires. They're doing it now on just about every call. So every 15-minute increments, County Fire will do a PAR check, right? From PAR, the incident commander will then talk to either their operations person or the crew and ask for PAR. That person or team will then get a status check, basically checking to make sure they're okay. That could be the fact of, hey, we want to know how much air you've got. We want to make sure you're making good headway. But basically what they'll come back with is 1099, right? 1099 means you're okay. So that's really what PAR boils down to. This gives a little bit more verbiage on that, but you'll hear that more commonly. Cancellation of a Mayday situation may be canceled when a firefighter has been rescued, either by the RIC or self-rescue, or the situation has been resolved, determined as a false alarm. Communication must be made from the IC to County Fire that all units of the Mayday has been canceled, okay? So in the event somebody calls Mayday and we send off a RIC team to go do the rescue, or they do a self-rescue, for us to come out of that Mayday situation or that rescue mode, that information needs to be relayed to the incident commander that's managing that rescue, and then there from County Fire. That way County Fire clears it and everything's good, okay? Until then, it's still deemed as potential, okay? Because there is a reason why during a Mayday incident, the operations IC, the person that's going to be handling the suppression efforts, the rest of the team that's doing the rest of the job while you've got a rescue team, their role immediately as soon as that happens is to do a roll call or do a PAR check. Why is that important? They need to make sure that everybody else is accounted for, okay? They need to make sure that the team that they know that they're responsible for is still with them and doing their job, right? The freelancing piece of it, the piece of them being lost, all those things come into account. If we can't get in contact with our suppression team for whatever reason, then all of a sudden we've got a bigger problem, right? Okay. So a tactical checklist readiness form. Similar to what we've got here, and we'll get into a class on utilizing our incident command boards. But some of the things that are going to be happening during this incident, and I don't know if you guys can see this or not. Again, you've got this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to go back and review. Declared emergency traffic, activated emergency button, Mayday, 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 that's been checked. Identify the Mayday of the firefighters by the Lunar report, that's been checked. We're going to deploy the RIC team, possible known location and equipment needed to perform the rescue efforts, that's been checked. The IC will coordinate with RIC and assign RIC officer to coordinate the rescue operations. That way that IC has a point of contact to talk to who's doing the rescue effort. That way that rescue person can handle to manage their team that's doing the rescue. Assign safety accountability officers to the rescue group. That way we kind of got an accountability check. So if it's on the Charlie side or Delta side, if we can assign a safety officer to kind of monitor them and so on and so forth. You know, hand over the operations to the operations IC, who will then conduct a PAR on all crews. And that's just the crews that are assigned to them, not the RIC team, not the Mayday channel, not the Mayday IC. It's going to be the other crews that are the suppression efforts, okay? Operations IC will reinforce firefighting positions. They'll consider deploying additional hand lines. The IC and RIC ops, the IC will maintain radio and crew discipline, so they're making sure that that's handling that. The IC RIC will consider softening and controlling all doors and the windows. One of the things that we've been practicing with the aerial class is softening the structure, all right? Softening the structure, what do you think that means? So one of the things that I think it was Chris or somebody had talked about, as a RIC person or RIC person that's your sign, you're doing a 360 on the house, right? It's not just the IC that does the 360. In fact, everybody that's assigned to a structure, as they're getting there, they should do a 360 of some sort. Kind of looking at, especially if you're going to be doing interior attack or something like that, knowing your exits, knowing your egress points, knowing where your windows potentially could be. Softening the structure is basically not going in and blowing out every single window by, busting them out or leaving every door open, but it's identifying them and then if possible getting them ready for the event that if there was a Mayday situation or a rescue or a emergency egress, county fire or our engine operator hits the horns 3 times to get everybody else because the IC sees something. Softening that structure to be able to get out is very, very important because not everybody carries hand tools with them, right? How many times have you seen or been guilty of going interior to the structure with somebody else has got the line, somebody else has got a flashlight, somebody else has got a tool, so I just go in there without anything, right? Well, if you get sideways and get off the line and you get lost, you can only do so much with this, right? But if the rescue team or whoever has gone around and softened the structure, making sure that the door's open, or at least identify where the windows are at. So if they need to open up a window, they can do that and know what it's going to take to get through those windows. You may find some of these houses that have bars on their windows. Well, what's going to take it for us to get through those? We're going to have to use a K-12, right? We're going to have to use something to cut that open with, right? Identifying that, letting the IC know or whoever over is Rick, hey, this is one of the challenges that we're going to have to face in the event that we have to go through that window. We can go ahead and identify that, and we can go ahead and start working on that problem right now without venting the house and potentially setting off the rest of the house if we're trying to control the environment, okay? So softening the structure is important. Ventilate and maintain tenable environment, provide lighting as required, okay? So if by chance, we know that we've got a potential firefighter that's trapped on the 2nd floor and we've got thick black smoke and we haven't done a real good job ventilating the house, we could potentially look at roof ops, ventilating the roof, opening up windows, and start making different ventilation attacks to it. Consider expanding command structure, right? It's going to take several other people helping manage the span of control, right? Because there's going to be multiple things that are going to be happening all at once. There's always multiple things happening at once as an incident commander on a working structure fire. But then you add a rescue to that, you've got a lot bigger problem. You've got multiple other things you're going to have to deal with. So you're going to have somebody. So if you've got, somebody that can't go interior, they're exterior only. Hey, I've got 4 other ambulances coming. I need them parked right here. When they get here, I need you to go over there and tell them what we've got, where we're going to be setting or staging our emergency personnel, so on and so forth. Hey, I've got Huntsville Fire Heavy coming. I need you to direct them in. I need their truck, their apparatus right here. I need you to handle that. So expanding that incident command structure by doing that, a liaison to the incident commander is really important, okay? Assign an officer to the medical group. Why is that going to be important? Is triage going to become a thing? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's right. You're going to have different kinds of injuries. You can potentially have a priority 0 firefighter and a priority 3 firefighter, right? And we're going to have to manage that. We're going to have to try to triage, as we would any other mass casualty incident. Not only that, but typically if you're going to try to assign a medical officer to that, it's not going to be your brand new person who just got out of EMT school. It's going to be able to hopefully help be somebody that's going to be able to handle what they're about to deal with, Assess need for higher level and technical rescue teams, heavy, Huntsville Heavy, Madison Heavy, what they're going to need, what their resources, what their things that they're going to use if by chance it is a technical type rescue. The IC operations officer will maintain structural stability of the building. So just keeping an eye on that as things change, right? So that. But this tactical checklist is on our SOG. You can go through that just as kind of a refresher reminder. We're going to have things that we're going to eventually deploy out to each one of our apparatuses for you to as a reference check. That way at that 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't have to know every single step. It will give you some reference points to be able to do that. But these are the things that I was talking about as far as you trying to expand that it's not just running the show. It's all these other things that have to happen during that, okay? All right, down to the end of it. And this is kind of what I'm talking about as far as what's going on with the scene, all right? All through the incident commander's head and out the mouth, you know, clear, calm, concise decisions being made. And that's really, you're not going to get it perfect. You're not going to be perfect at this. You know, hopefully it's a situation that nobody in here has to ever handle or have to deal with. You know, I pray that we have, you know, the scenes that we can manage without having a Mayday situation. But in the event it happens, and there's no guarantee that it won't, that you kind of keep this in mind.